The emergency room doors burst open at 3:47 a.m. as paramedics rushed in on a young woman barely conscious on a stretcher. Her skin had turned an alarming shade of yellow, her breathing was shallow, and her family trailed behind, whispering words that would haunt the medical staff for months to come. "She's been doing this for years. Don't let her fool you." What happened next would expose a web of family betrayal, medical mysteries, and a truth so shocking that it would bring the state medical board to a small town in Ohio, forever changing how one hospital handles cases of disputed illness. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 26-year-old Rebecca Martinez had always been the black sheep of her family. Growing up in the affluent suburb of Westerville, Ohio, she was the artistic daughter among a family of engineers and business executives. While her older brother David climbed the corporate ladder at a tech firm, and her younger sister Amanda pursued pre-med at Ohio State, Rebecca spent her days working at a local pottery studio and selling her ceramics at weekend farmers markets. The Martinez family had built their reputation on success and appearances. Robert Martinez Sr. owned 3 auto dealerships across central Ohio, and his wife Patricia ran a successful real estate agency. Their Tudor-style home on Maple Ridge Drive was the kind of place where holiday parties were catered and the lawn was professionally maintained year-round. Rebecca's bohemian lifestyle and modest income had always been a source of quiet embarrassment for her parents. Everything changed in the spring of 2023 when Rebecca began experiencing severe fatigue that left her unable to work for days at a time. At first, she attributed it to stress from a recent breakup and the financial pressure of running her small business. But as weeks turned into months, her symptoms intensified. She developed joint pain that made it difficult to throw pottery, her signature craft. Strange rashes would appear and disappear without warning. Most concerning of all, she began losing weight rapidly despite maintaining her normal appetite. Rebecca's first visit to Dr. Kenneth Walsh at Riverside Family Medicine yielded inconclusive results. Blood work showed some minor irregularities, but nothing that immediately explained her symptoms. Dr. Walsh, a seasoned physician with 30 years of experience, recommended rest and follow-up appointments. He noted in Rebecca's file that she appeared genuinely distressed about her condition and showed no signs of malingering. As Rebecca's condition worsened, she found herself making frequent trips to various specialists throughout Columbus. A rheumatologist ran extensive tests for autoimmune conditions. A gastroenterologist performed an endoscopy after Rebecca began experiencing severe abdominal pain. A dermatologist examined her recurring rashes and took multiple biopsies. Each specialist found pieces of a puzzle, but couldn't see the complete picture. The medical bills began piling up quickly. Rebecca's minimal health insurance through the Freelancers Association covered only a fraction of the costs. Within 3 months, she had accumulated over $12,000 in medical debt. Her pottery business suffered as she missed craft shows and couldn't fulfill custom orders during her worst flare-ups. It was during a family dinner in late June that Rebecca made what would prove to be a fateful decision. Surrounded by her parents and siblings at their dining room table, she broke down crying as she described her latest symptoms and the mounting bills. Her hands shook as she explained how she could barely hold a coffee mug that morning, let alone work on the pottery wheel. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she said through tears. "The doctors keep running tests, but nobody can tell me what's happening. I'm scared, and I can't afford to keep going to appointments." Her father, Robert, set down his fork with a heavy sigh. Patricia reached across the table and patted Rebecca's hand with the kind of gesture that looked caring but felt clinical. David, ever the practical one, suggested she look into financial assistance programs at the hospitals. But it was Amanda, the pre-med student, who spoke the words that would echo through the months to come. "Rebecca, have you considered that maybe you're pushing yourself too hard, trying to make this pottery thing work? Sometimes our bodies manifest stress in physical ways." The implication was clear, though unspoken. Amanda's comment planted a seed of doubt that would grow in the family's collective mind over the following weeks. Rebecca's parents offered to help with her medical bills, but their assistance came with conditions. She would need to move back into their house temporarily to recover properly and would have to be completely transparent about all her medical appointments and treatments. Robert insisted on speaking directly with her doctors to understand her condition better. Initially grateful for the support, Rebecca agreed. She packed up her small apartment above the pottery studio and moved back into her childhood bedroom. The room had been converted into Patricia's home office years earlier, but they cleared out the desk and filing cabinets to make space for a twin bed and a small dresser. Living at home again at 26 felt like a step backward, but Rebecca hoped it would be temporary. She continued seeing doctors and following up on test results, now with her parents driving her to appointments and sitting in waiting rooms. Robert had insisted on this, claiming he wanted to ensure she wasn't wasting money on unnecessary procedures. The first sign of real trouble came during an appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen, an endocrinologist, who had been investigating whether Rebecca might have a thyroid disorder. Dr. Chen had ordered comprehensive hormone panels and was reviewing the results when Robert interrupted her to ask pointed questions about the necessity of each test. "Doctor, I need to ask you directly," Robert said, leaning forward in his chair while Rebecca sat pale and exhausted beside him. "Is it possible that my daughter is exaggerating her symptoms? We're spending thousands of dollars and she doesn't seem to be getting any better." Dr. Chen looked uncomfortable but maintained her professional demeanor. "Mr. Martinez, I can assure you that Rebecca's test results show several concerning abnormalities. While we haven't reached a definitive diagnosis yet, there are clear indicators that something significant is affecting her health." But Robert wasn't satisfied. After the appointment, he began making phone calls to Rebecca's other doctors, expressing similar concerns. He started documenting her daily activities, noting when she seemed to have energy for certain tasks but claimed to be too sick for others. When Rebecca spent an afternoon glazing pottery in the garage because it was one of her few good days in weeks, Robert photographed her at work and saved the images to his phone. Patricia joined in the surveillance, timing how long she spent in bed versus how long she spent on her phone or watching television. They created a spreadsheet tracking her symptoms against her activities, looking for inconsistencies that might prove their growing suspicion that Rebecca was somehow fabricating or exaggerating her illness. The family dynamic shifted dramatically. David and Amanda, influenced by their parents' doubts, began questioning Rebecca's credibility during their weekly family dinners. Amanda, armed with her pre-med knowledge, would challenge Rebecca's descriptions of her symptoms, suggesting alternative explanations that implied psychological rather than physical causes. "You know, Rebecca," Amanda said during one particularly tense dinner, "there's a condition called somatic symptom disorder, where people genuinely feel sick, but the symptoms are actually caused by psychological factors. Maybe you should see a therapist instead of all these specialists." Rebecca felt increasingly isolated and began to doubt herself. The constant scrutiny and questioning from her family made her second-guess her own experience of illness. Some days, she wondered if she was somehow unconsciously making herself sick, despite the very real pain and fatigue she experienced. The situation reached a breaking point in early September when Rebecca collapsed during a family barbecue in their backyard. She had been helping Patricia arrange flowers on the patio tables when she suddenly became dizzy and fell, striking her head on the concrete. Instead of immediate concern, her family's first reaction was suspicion. "She was fine 5 minutes ago," David muttered to Amanda as they watched paramedics check Rebecca's vital signs. "Classic attention-seeking behavior," Patricia whispered to Robert, right when everyone was having a good time. The paramedics found Rebecca's blood pressure dangerously low and her heart rate elevated. They recommended immediate transport to the emergency room, but Robert hesitated, asking if it was really necessary. Only when the lead paramedic insisted that Rebecca's vital signs were concerning did the family agree to follow the ambulance to Riverside General Hospital. At the hospital, Dr. Michael Torres, the emergency physician on duty, was struck by the family's unusual behavior. Instead of showing typical concern for their daughter's condition, the Martinez family seemed more focused on discussing her medical history and their doubts about her symptoms with the medical staff. "Doctor, we need you to know that Rebecca has been claiming to be sick for months," Patricia told Dr. Torres while Rebecca lay semi-conscious on the examination table. "We've spent thousands of dollars on tests, and nothing ever comes back definitively wrong. We think she might be doing this for attention or to avoid having to support herself." Dr. Torres had seen many cases of suspected malingering in his 15 years of emergency medicine, but something about this situation felt different. Rebecca's physical presentation didn't match the family's description of someone faking illness. Her skin had a slight yellow tinge that suggested possible liver involvement, and her blood work showed several red flags that warranted immediate investigation. As Rebecca was admitted to the hospital for observation and further testing, her family's accusations followed her into her room. Nurses began to view her case with skepticism, influenced by the family's persistent claims that she was manipulating the situation. Some staff members found themselves questioning whether they were being deceived by an elaborate performance. But Rebecca's condition continued to deteriorate during her hospital stay. Her liver enzymes climbed to dangerous levels, and she developed new symptoms that couldn't be easily dismissed or fabricated. Torres consulted with several specialists, including hepatologist Dr. Jennifer Park, who became increasingly concerned about Rebecca's rapidly changing lab values. The tension between Rebecca's obvious physical decline and her family's insistence that she was faking illness created an unprecedented situation at Riverside General. The medical staff found themselves caught between their clinical observations and the persistent doubts planted by people who supposedly knew the patient best. What none of them realized was that Rebecca's case was about to take a turn that would expose a truth far more complex and disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Dr. Jennifer Park had seen thousands of liver cases throughout her career as a hepatologist, but Rebecca Martinez's labs kept her awake at night. The young woman's bilirubin levels were climbing steadily, explaining the yellow tinge to her skin, while her albumin dropped to dangerously low levels. Most puzzling were the fluctuations in her enzyme patterns. They didn't match any textbook presentation she'd encountered. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. On Rebecca's third day in the hospital, Dr. Park made an unusual decision. She requested security footage from the hallway cameras outside Rebecca's room. Something about the timing of symptom changes bothered her, and she wanted to rule out any external factors affecting her patient's condition. What she discovered in those grainy surveillance videos would change everything. The footage showed Robert Martinez entering Rebecca's room multiple times during visiting hours, which was normal. But Dr. Park noticed he always carried a large coffee cup from the hospital cafeteria, and he consistently spent several minutes alone with Rebecca while other family members stepped out to speak with nurses or use the restroom. More concerning was Rebecca's pattern of symptom escalation. Her worst episodes of nausea, vomiting, and confusion consistently occurred within 2 to 4 hours after her father's visits. Dr. Park cross-referenced the timestamps with Rebecca's medical chart and found an undeniable correlation. She immediately contacted Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the hospital's chief of internal medicine, and shared her findings. Dr. Hayes, a careful physician who had navigated countless complex cases during her 23-year career, agreed that the pattern warranted investigation. "We need to involve security and potentially law enforcement," Dr. Hayes told Dr. Park during their private meeting in her office. "If someone is deliberately causing this patient's symptoms, we're looking at a serious crime." Meanwhile, Rebecca's condition had stabilized somewhat, but she remained weak and confused. The medical team had started her on supportive treatment for liver dysfunction, but without understanding the underlying cause, they were essentially treating symptoms rather than the root problem. Rebecca's family maintained their vigilant presence in her hospital room. Patricia had taken time off from her real estate business to stay with Rebecca during the day, while Robert visited every evening after closing his dealerships. David and Amanda alternated weekend shifts, ensuring someone from the family was always present. To the nursing staff, the Martinez family appeared devoted and concerned. Patricia brought Rebecca's favorite books and magazines, Robert ensured she had fresh flowers in her room, Amanda researched Rebecca's symptoms online and presented printed articles to her doctors, still convinced that psychological factors were at play. But their behavior had begun to raise red flags among the more experienced nurses. Charge nurse Karen Williams, who had worked at Riverside General for 18 years, noticed subtle inconsistencies in how the family interacted with Rebecca versus how they spoke about her to medical staff. "When they think we're not listening," Karen mentioned to her colleague during a shift change, "they still talk about her like she's putting on an act, but when we're in the room, they're all concerned and sympathetic. Something doesn't sit right with me." The breakthrough came when Dr. Park decided to implement controlled visitor restrictions. Under the guise of infection control protocols, she limited Rebecca's visitors to one person at a time for maximum periods of 2 hours. She also arranged for continuous cardiac monitoring, which would provide detailed timestamps for any changes in Rebecca's vital signs. For the first 48 hours under these new restrictions, Rebecca showed remarkable improvement. Her nausea subsided, her mental clarity returned, and her liver enzymes began to stabilize. The medical team was cautiously optimistic that whatever had been affecting her was resolving. Then, Robert Martinez arrived for his scheduled evening visit on Thursday, September 21st. Dr. Park had strategically positioned herself at the nurse's station with a clear view of Rebecca's room. She watched Robert enter with his usual coffee cup and observed his interaction with his daughter through the glass door. Rebecca appeared happy to see him, smiling and talking animatedly for the first time in days. 30 minutes into the visit, Robert stepped into Rebecca's bathroom. Security footage would later show him emerging with an empty coffee cup, which he refilled at the small sink in Rebecca's room before sitting back down beside her bed. "Dad, you're the only one who believes I'm really sick. The doctors keep looking at me like I'm crazy, and I can see Amanda and David whispering about me. It means everything that you're supporting me through this." Robert's response chilled Dr. Park to the bone. "Of course, sweetheart. Family has to stick together. Here, I brought you some of that herbal tea you like. It might help settle your stomach." Through the glass, Dr. Park watched Rebecca gratefully accept a small thermos from her father. She drank deeply, trusting the man who had raised her and who seemed to be her only advocate in a family full of doubters. Within 90 minutes of Robert's departure, Rebecca's condition crashed. She began vomiting violently, her heart rate spiked, and her mental state deteriorated rapidly. The correlation was too obvious to ignore. Dr. Park immediately ordered comprehensive toxicology screens, including tests for substances that wouldn't appear in standard drug panels. She also implemented emergency protocols to save samples of Rebecca's blood, urine, and vomit for potential forensic analysis. The toxicology results took 3 days to process, but when they arrived, they confirmed Dr. Park's worst suspicions. Rebecca's system contained significant levels of colchicine, medication typically used to treat gout and certain inflammatory conditions. In therapeutic doses, colchicine was relatively safe. In the quantities found in Rebecca's blood, it was slowly poisoning her. Colchicine poisoning explained everything: the liver dysfunction, the gastrointestinal symptoms, the neurological effects, and the fluctuating pattern of illness that had baffled her previous doctors. Most sinister of all, colchicine poisoning could mimic various autoimmune and inflammatory conditions, making it the perfect weapon for someone with medical knowledge who wanted to make their victim appear genuinely ill. Dr. Hayes immediately contacted hospital security and the Columbus Police Department. Detective Maria Santos, a veteran investigator with the Special Victims Unit, arrived at Riverside General within 2 hours of the call. "We need to proceed very carefully," Detective Santos explained to the medical team during an emergency meeting in the hospital conference room. "We have a patient who's been systematically poisoned by someone she trusts, but we need to ensure her safety while gathering evidence for prosecution." The plan they developed was methodical and designed to protect Rebecca while building an ironclad case. They would continue the visitor restrictions, but now with the specific purpose of preventing further poisoning. Undercover security officers would be positioned throughout the hospital, and all of Rebecca's food and beverages would be monitored. Most importantly, they would not yet tell Rebecca about their discovery. Her genuine reactions to her family's behavior were crucial evidence, and they couldn't risk her inadvertently alerting her father to their investigation. Dr. Park took on the difficult task of treating Rebecca's colchicine poisoning while maintaining the pretense that they were still searching for a diagnosis. Fortunately, with the source of poisoning eliminated, Rebecca's body began to heal rapidly. Within a week of the controlled environment, Rebecca's liver function normalized, her energy returned, and the mysterious symptoms that had plagued her for months disappeared entirely. To anyone observing, it appeared that the hospital had finally found the right treatment approach. Robert Martinez, however, was becoming increasingly frustrated. His evening visits continued under the new restrictions, but he could no longer bring outside food or beverages to Rebecca. When he asked why these protocols had been implemented, hospital staff cited recent concerns about hospital-acquired infections and the need to control what patients consumed. "It seems excessive," Robert complained to Patricia during one of their phone conversations, unaware that Detective Santos had obtained a warrant to monitor his communications. Rebecca was just starting to improve, and now they're treating her like she's contagious or something. Patricia's response revealed the depth of their deception. "Maybe it's for the best, Robert. If she keeps getting better like this, we won't have to worry about the medical bills anymore. And maybe she'll finally realize she needs to get a real job instead of playing with clay all day." The recorded conversation provided crucial insight into the family's motivation. This wasn't just about money or attention. It was about control and their desire to force Rebecca into conforming to their expectations for her life. Detective Santos began building a comprehensive case. She obtained Robert's medical records and discovered he had been prescribed colchicine 2 years earlier for a brief gout episode. Pharmacy records showed he had recently refilled the prescription despite having no current medical need for the medication. Financial records revealed another disturbing pattern. While the Martinez family claimed to be concerned about Rebecca's medical expenses, Robert had increased his life insurance policy on Rebecca just 3 months before her symptoms began. The policy, originally worth $50,000, had been upgraded to $250,000. Bank statements showed regular transfers from Rebecca's accounts to help cover her medical bills, but also revealed that Robert had been systematically draining her business account while she was too sick to monitor her finances closely. Her pottery business, which had been modestly profitable, was now deeply in debt due to missed orders and Robert's unauthorized withdrawals. The investigation had uncovered not just attempted murder, but a complex scheme of financial abuse and psychological manipulation that had been destroying Rebecca's life for months. As Detective Santos prepared to make arrests, she knew that the most challenging part of the case lay ahead, helping Rebecca understand that the father who seemed to be her only supporter had actually been the one slowly killing her. The hardest conversation of Dr. Jennifer Park's career took place on a Tuesday morning in October in Rebecca's hospital room overlooking the parking lot where her father had parked his silver BMW hundreds of times over the past months. Rebecca was sitting up in bed, looking healthier than she had in nearly a year. Her skin had returned to its natural color, her eyes were bright and alert, and she had gained back 12 pounds. To anyone observing, she appeared to be a young woman who had recovered from a mysterious illness through excellent medical care. "Rebecca, I need to discuss something very important with you," Dr. Park began, pulling up a chair beside the bed. Detective Santos stood quietly near the door, having agreed to let the doctor handle the initial revelation. "We've discovered what's been making you sick, and the information is going to be very difficult to hear." Rebecca's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Did you find some rare disease? Is it genetic? Is that why my family has been so worried about the costs?" Dr. Park took a deep breath. "Rebecca, you were being poisoned. Someone has been systematically giving you colchicine, a medication that caused all of your symptoms over the past several months." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Rebecca stared at Dr. Park, her mind struggling to process the information. "Poisoned? But who would? I mean, how is that possible?" "We have evidence that suggests your father was adding colchicine to beverages he brought you, both at home and here in the hospital," Dr. Park said gently. "The medication was causing your liver dysfunction, your gastrointestinal symptoms, and your neurological issues." Rebecca's world tilted. She gripped the bed rails, her knuckles turning white. "My dad? No, that's impossible. He's been the only one supporting me. He's been paying my medical bills. He's been here every day." Detective Santos stepped forward. "Rebecca, I'm Detective Maria Santos with the Columbus Police. I know this is overwhelming, but we have substantial evidence. Your father obtained colchicine through a prescription he no longer needed medically. We have surveillance footage showing him tampering with your drinks and toxicology reports confirming the presence of the drug in your system." The revelation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She doubled over, not from illness this time, but from the emotional trauma of understanding that her father, the person she trusted most, had been slowly killing her while presenting himself as her caregiver and advocate. "But why?" Rebecca whispered. tears streaming down her face. Why would he do this to me? Detective Santos had investigated many cases of family violence, but the complexity of Robert Martinez's motivations made this case particularly disturbing. Based on our investigation, we believe there were multiple factors: financial gain through life insurance, control over your life choices, and possibly resentment about your independence and career path. What Rebecca didn't yet know was that Detective Santos had uncovered an even darker layer to her father's scheme. Phone records showed that Robert had been in contact with Dr. Amanda Phillips, a psychiatrist who specialized in factitious disorders. He had been laying groundwork to have Rebecca committed to a psychiatric facility, claiming she was suffering from severe mental illness that caused her to make herself sick for attention. The plan was sophisticated and cruel. By poisoning Rebecca just enough to create genuine symptoms, while simultaneously undermining her credibility with family members and some medical professionals, Robert could eventually argue that she was mentally unstable and needed long-term psychiatric care. This would give him power of attorney over her finances and effectively remove her from the family permanently. Dr. Phillips, unaware that she was being manipulated, had already begun preparing paperwork based on Robert's false reports about Rebecca's behavior and medical history. The psychiatrist believed she was helping a concerned father deal with a daughter suffering from severe psychological issues. As Detective Santos explained these discoveries to Rebecca, the young woman's shock deepened. He was going to have me committed? He wanted people to think I was crazy? The evidence suggests that was his ultimate goal, Detective Santos confirmed. Your recovery here in the hospital, when you were protected from further poisoning, actually complicated his plan. He needed you to remain sick to make his case for psychiatric intervention. Meanwhile, Robert Martinez was growing increasingly suspicious about the hospital's security measures. He had tried multiple times to bring Rebecca homemade soup and herbal tea, only to be told that dietary restrictions prevented outside food and beverages. When he complained to hospital administration, he was given vague explanations about infection control protocols. His frustration peaked when he discovered that security cameras had been installed in all patient room corridors. When he questioned a nurse about the new cameras, she explained they were part of updated safety measures throughout the hospital. But Robert's engineering background made him naturally analytical, and he began to notice other changes. Rebecca was improving too quickly for someone with the complex medical issues she had been experiencing. Her doctors seemed to be avoiding specific conversations about her diagnosis. Most concerning to him, Rebecca herself was asking fewer questions about her condition and seemed more focused on regaining her strength. On Thursday afternoon, Robert decided to test his suspicions. He told Patricia he was visiting Rebecca, but instead parked across the street from the hospital and watched the building through binoculars he kept in his car for hunting trips. What he saw confirmed his fears. Detective Santos entered the hospital through the main entrance and went directly to the elevators without stopping at visitor registration. 20 minutes later, she was joined by a man in a suit who Robert recognized as someone he had seen in the hospital corridors multiple times over the past week. Robert Martinez realized his carefully constructed plan was unraveling. That evening, instead of his usual hospital visit, he called Rebecca's room from his office. "Sweetheart, I'm going to be out of town for a few days," he told her. "Business emergency in Cleveland. Your mother will visit tomorrow, and David said he'd stop by over the weekend." Rebecca, still reeling from the day's revelations, but not yet knowing about the arrest warrant being prepared, found herself analyzing her father's voice for signs of deception. For the first time in months, she felt a chill of fear when speaking with him. "Okay, Dad, is everything all right? You sound different."
"Just tired from work stress," Robert replied. "You focus on getting better. I'll see you when I get back." After ending the call, Robert began implementing an escape plan he had developed years earlier during his military service. He had always maintained emergency funds in offshore accounts and had kept current identification documents for an alternate identity he had established decades ago. But Detective Santos had anticipated this possibility. Robert Martinez had been under surveillance since the investigation began, and when he failed to appear at the hospital for his usual evening visit, unmarked police vehicles were already positioned near his home and businesses. The arrest happened at 6:23 a.m. on Friday morning in the parking garage of Robert's main dealership. He had arrived early, planning to access his office safe where he kept cash and documents needed for his disappearance. Instead, he found Detective Santos and 4 officers waiting beside his BMW. Robert Martinez, you're under arrest for attempted murder, aggravated assault, financial abuse, and fraud, Detective Santos announced as handcuffs were placed on his wrists. Robert's response revealed the depth of his narcissism and lack of remorse. "This is ridiculous. Rebecca has been sick for months. I've been paying her medical bills and taking care of her. You people have no idea what you're doing." Even while being arrested for poisoning his own daughter, Robert maintained the facade of being her concerned father. He showed no acknowledgement of wrongdoing and seemed genuinely convinced that his actions were justified. The arrest made local news within hours, sending shockwaves through Westerville's business community, where Robert was known as a successful entrepreneur and family man. His dealerships were temporarily closed pending investigation, and Patricia Martinez found herself facing questions from neighbors and clients about her husband's crimes. At the hospital, Rebecca watched the news coverage with a mixture of relief and devastation. The man she had loved and trusted her entire life was being charged with trying to kill her. The months of illness, the financial stress, the family discord, all of it had been orchestrated by someone who was supposed to protect her. Dr. Park sat with Rebecca as she processed this information, knowing that the physical healing was only the beginning of her patient's recovery. The psychological trauma of betrayal by a parent would require long-term therapy and support. But Rebecca Martinez was stronger than anyone realized, including her father, who had underestimated her resilience while systematically destroying her health and independence. The Ohio State Medical Board's investigation began 3 days after Robert Martinez's arrest, triggered by a formal complaint filed by Dr. Jennifer Park. What she had discovered at Riverside General Hospital raised troubling questions about how the medical system had failed to protect Rebecca Martinez for nearly 8 months. Dr. Richard Thompson, the board's chief investigator, arrived in Columbus with a team of specialists to conduct a comprehensive review of Rebecca's case. Their mandate was clear: determine how multiple healthcare providers had missed signs of intentional poisoning, and identify systemic failures that allowed the abuse to continue undetected. The investigation would ultimately examine the medical records of 14 different doctors across 6 healthcare facilities. Each physician had seen pieces of Rebecca's puzzle, but none had connected the dots to recognize deliberate poisoning. The board's findings would revolutionize how Ohio hospitals handle suspected abuse cases. Dr. Thompson's first stop was the office of Dr. Kenneth Walsh, Rebecca's primary care physician, who had been treating her since the symptoms began. Dr. Walsh, a respected family doctor with an unblemished 30-year career, found himself defending decisions he had made in good faith. The patient presented with vague symptoms that could indicate dozens of different conditions, Dr. Walsh explained during his interview with the medical board. Her family was supportive and involved in her care. There were no red flags suggesting deliberate harm. But Dr. Thompson had reviewed Rebecca's complete medical file, including notes from specialists and emergency room visits. What emerged was a pattern that should have triggered suspicion: symptoms that appeared and disappeared without clear medical explanation, a family that seemed unusually focused on questioning the patient's credibility, and test results that didn't quite fit any standard diagnosis. Dr. Walsh, in your 30 years of practice, have you ever encountered a case where family members repeatedly suggested a patient was exaggerating or fabricating symptoms? Dr. Thompson asked. Dr. Walsh paused, considering the question carefully. Occasionally, yes, usually in cases involving addiction or mental health issues. But Rebecca showed no signs of drug-seeking behavior or psychiatric disorders. Her family seemed genuinely concerned about her welfare. This was precisely the problem the medical board identified throughout their investigation. Robert Martinez had expertly manipulated the healthcare system by presenting himself as a concerned father while subtly undermining his daughter's credibility. His approach was so sophisticated that experienced physicians accepted his version of events without question. The board's review revealed that Robert had perfected his manipulation tactics over months of medical appointments. He would arrive early to speak privately with doctors before Rebecca was examined, planting seeds of doubt about his reliability. He documented her activities at home, presenting evidence that she could perform certain tasks while claiming to be too sick for others. Most damaging was Robert's technique of appearing supportive in Rebecca's presence while expressing doubts to medical staff when she couldn't hear. This created a false narrative that he was a devoted father dealing with a daughter who might be unconsciously making herself sick for psychological reasons. Dr. Amanda Chen, the endocrinologist who had treated Rebecca, found herself particularly shaken by the board's investigation. She had noticed the father's unusual behavior during appointments, but had attributed it to normal parental concern about mounting medical bills and unclear diagnoses. He seemed like any worried parent, Dr. Chen told the investigators. He asked detailed questions about tests and treatments. He wanted to understand every aspect of his daughter's care. I actually appreciated having such an engaged family member. But the medical board's analysis showed that Robert's questions had a different purpose. He was gathering information to ensure his poisoning wouldn't be detected. His inquiries about liver function tests helped him adjust dosages to stay below levels that would trigger immediate alarm. His interest in psychiatric evaluations was laying groundwork for his ultimate plan to have Rebecca declared mentally incompetent. The investigation expanded beyond individual doctor interviews to examine hospital protocols and training procedures. Dr. Thompson's team discovered that Riverside General Hospital, like most medical facilities, had comprehensive procedures for detecting child abuse, but limited protocols for identifying adult victims of family violence. "We're trained to look for signs of domestic violence between partners," explained Dr. Michael Torres, the emergency physician who had treated Rebecca during her collapse. But the idea that a parent would systematically poison their adult child while appearing to support them, that's not something we're specifically trained to recognize. The medical board's findings led to immediate changes in how Ohio hospitals handle cases involving unexplained illnesses and concerned family members. New protocols required medical staff to document family dynamics more carefully and to consider the possibility of intentional harm even when families appeared supportive. Meanwhile, Rebecca's recovery continued under the careful supervision of Dr. Park and a team of specialists. The physical effects of colchicine poisoning were reversing, but the psychological trauma required intensive therapy. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a psychiatrist specializing in trauma from family abuse, began working with Rebecca to process the betrayal and manipulation she had experienced. Rebecca's case is particularly complex because her abuser was also her apparent advocate, Dr. Mitchell explained to the medical board during their investigation. She was isolated from other family members who doubted her illness, making her more dependent on the person who was actually harming her. This created a devastating psychological trap. The therapy sessions revealed the depth of Robert's manipulation. He had been undermining Rebecca's confidence and independence for years, not just months. Her decision to pursue art instead of a traditional career had been a source of ongoing conflict, and her illness had given him the perfect opportunity to prove that her choices were irresponsible and unsustainable. Rebecca began to remember conversations and incidents from her childhood that took on new meaning in light of recent events. Times when she had been sick as a child and her father had been unusually attentive, bringing her special foods and drinks. Episodes of stomach upset that occurred after family disagreements about her future plans. "I'm starting to wonder if this wasn't the first time," Rebecca confided to Dr. Mitchell during one of their sessions. "There were times growing up when I got sick after arguing with my parents about something important to me. I always thought it was stressful, but now..." Dr. Mitchell helped Rebecca understand that questioning her past experiences was a normal part of processing trauma, but that it was important not to let suspicion consume her healing process. Whether or not Robert had poisoned her before, Rebecca needed to focus on her current recovery and building a life free from his influence. The legal proceedings against Robert Martinez moved forward rapidly. Franklin County Prosecutor James Wilson assembled a team of attorneys specializing in domestic violence and financial crimes. The case was unusual because it involved attempted murder disguised as caregiving, a crime that challenged traditional legal frameworks. Robert's defense attorney, Margaret Foster, faced the difficult task of defending a client whose actions seemed indefensible. Her strategy focused on questioning the medical evidence and suggesting that Rebecca's illness might have been coincidental rather than intentionally caused. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Foster argued during opening statements, correlation does not equal causation. Yes, Mr. Martinez had access to colchicine. Yes, he visited his daughter regularly. But the prosecution has not proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he deliberately poisoned her. But Prosecutor Wilson had built an overwhelming case. Security footage showed Robert tampering with Rebecca's drinks. Financial records revealed his motives involving insurance fraud and theft from her business accounts. Recorded phone conversations captured him discussing his frustration with Rebecca's lifestyle choices and his desire to force her into conformity. Most damaging was the testimony of Dr. Amanda Phillips, the psychiatrist Robert had contacted about having Rebecca committed. Dr. Phillips explained how Robert had painted a picture of a daughter suffering from severe mental illness who needed immediate psychiatric intervention. Mr. Martinez presented detailed documentation of his daughter's supposed psychological instability, Dr. Phillips testified. He claimed she was making herself sick for attention and that her family was at their wits' end. Based on his reports, I was prepared to recommend involuntary commitment. The trial revealed the full scope of Robert's plan. He hadn't just been poisoning Rebecca, he had been systematically destroying her credibility, her finances, and his support system to gain complete control over his life. The attempted murder was just one component of a comprehensive campaign of abuse designed to eliminate his daughter's independence entirely.
As the medical board completed their investigation and the legal system pursued justice, Rebecca Martinez began the long process of rebuilding her life. The pottery studio above her former apartment had been maintained by her landlord, who had refused to rent it to anyone else after learning about her situation. Returning to her wheel for the first time in months, Rebecca felt the clay respond to her touch with a familiarity that brought tears to her eyes. Her hands were steady, her vision clear, and her body strong. The illness that had nearly destroyed her was gone, along with the person who had caused it. But the real healing was just beginning. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before reaching their verdict. On a cold November morning, 12 citizens of Franklin County filed back into the courtroom where Robert Martinez sat beside his attorney, his expression betraying nothing of the anxiety that had consumed him for weeks. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Catherine Morrison asked. "We have, Your Honor," replied the jury foreman, a retired teacher who had listened intently to every piece of evidence presented during the 3-week trial. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." The words echoed through the packed courtroom. Rebecca Martinez, sitting in the front row between Dr. Jennifer Park and her therapist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, felt a wave of relief wash over her. Behind her, reporters scribbled notes furiously, while sketch artists captured the moment Robert Martinez's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. "On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of financial abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud, we find the defendant guilty." With each guilty verdict, Patricia Martinez's sobs grew louder. She had maintained her husband's innocence throughout the trial, despite overwhelming evidence of his crimes. David and Amanda sat stone-faced beside their mother, finally confronting the reality that their father was a calculated predator who had nearly killed their sister. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, but the immediate impact of the verdict reverberated far beyond the courtroom. The case had become a landmark prosecution that would influence how Ohio handled cases of adult family abuse for years to come. During the sentencing hearing in December, Rebecca Martinez stood before the court to deliver her victim impact statement. She had spent weeks crafting her words with Dr. Mitchell's guidance, struggling to articulate the profound betrayal and trauma she had endured. "Your Honor, my father didn't just try to kill me," Rebecca began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was sharing. "He systematically destroyed my trust in my own body, my own mind, and my own family.
He made me doubt my reality while positioning himself as my savior. The physical poisoning was just one part of a campaign designed to erase who I was and force me to become who he wanted me to be. She paused, looking directly at Robert for the first time since learning the truth about his actions. I've lost a year of my life to illness he caused, thousands of dollars to medical bills for treatment I didn't need, and my relationship with family members who believed his lies about me. But I've gained something too, the knowledge that I'm stronger than he ever believed I could be. Judge Morrison sentenced Robert Martinez to 25 years in prison, without possibility of parole for 15 years. The sentence reflected the calculated nature of his crimes and the ongoing threat he posed to Rebecca's safety. Additional charges related to financial crimes added another 8 years to his sentence. Mr. Martinez, your actions represent one of the most calculated and cruel cases of family abuse this court has encountered, Judge Morrison stated during sentencing. You exploited your position as a father to systematically poison your daughter while manipulating the medical system and your family to support your deception. The sentence I'm imposing reflects the severity of your crimes and the need to protect society from your dangerous behavior. Robert Martinez showed no emotion as his sentence was read. Even facing decades in prison, he maintained the same detached demeanor that had helped him deceive medical professionals and family members for months. The aftermath of the trial brought unexpected developments for the Martinez family. Patricia filed for divorce within weeks of Robert's sentencing, finally accepting that her husband was not the man she had believed him to be. The divorce proceedings revealed additional financial crimes, including hidden assets and fraudulent business transactions that had been funding Robert's elaborate deceptions. David and Amanda struggled to reconcile their memories of their father with the reality of his crimes. Both siblings had supported their parents' suspicions about Rebecca's illness, making them unwitting accomplices in her abuse. The guilt they carried led both to seek therapy to process their role in enabling their father's behavior. We weren't innocent victims, Amanda confided to Rebecca during one of their first honest conversations since the trial. Dad manipulated us, but we chose to believe him instead of believing you. We chose to think the worst of our own sister because it was easier than questioning our father. The reconciliation between Rebecca and her siblings was slow and difficult, mediated by family therapists who specialized in trauma recovery. Trust had to be rebuilt from nothing, with Amanda and David proving through consistent actions that they were committed to supporting Rebecca's healing rather than their father's narrative. Meanwhile, the medical community continued grappling with the implications of her case. The Ohio State Medical Board's investigation had resulted in new mandatory training for healthcare providers on recognizing signs of intentional poisoning and family manipulation. Dr. Jennifer Park became a leading advocate for these reforms, speaking at medical conferences across the country about the lessons learned from Rebecca's case. We have to abandon the assumption that concerned family members are always acting in good faith, Dr. Park explained during a presentation at the American Medical Association's annual conference. Abusers are often sophisticated manipulators who exploit our trust and our desire to work collaboratively with families. We need better protocols for independent assessment of patients when family dynamics seem questionable. Riverside General Hospital implemented comprehensive changes to their patient care protocols, including requirements for one-on-one patient interviews without family present and mandatory consultation with social workers when family members repeatedly question a patient's credibility. These changes were adopted by hospitals throughout Ohio and eventually became model policies for medical facilities nationwide. Rebecca's pottery business slowly recovered as she regained her strength and focus. The months of illness had cost her numerous commissions and damaged relationships with gallery owners who had counted on her reliability. But word of her story spread through Columbus's arts community, bringing new customers who wanted to support her recovery. Her work evolved during this period, incorporating themes of healing and resilience that resonated with people who had faced their own struggles with illness and family trauma. A local gallery organized a solo exhibition of her post-recovery pieces, titled Emergence, which sold out on opening night.
The financial recovery was more challenging. Rebecca had lost her business savings to medical bills and her father's theft, and the legal proceedings had consumed additional resources. However, a victims' compensation fund established by the state helped cover her medical expenses, and she successfully sued her father's estate for restitution. More importantly, Rebecca discovered she had a community of support she never knew existed. Other survivors of family abuse reached out to share their stories and offer encouragement. Medical professionals who had been following her case provided ongoing care at reduced costs. Even strangers who had read about her situation in the newspaper sent cards and small donations to help with her recovery. Dr. Sarah Mitchell continued working with Rebecca for 2 years after the trial, helping her process not just the recent trauma, but also patterns of manipulation and control that had shaped her relationship with her father throughout her life. The therapy revealed that Robert's poisoning campaign was the culmination of decades of psychological abuse designed to keep Rebecca dependent and compliant. Your father's need to control you intensified when you started succeeding independently, Dr. Mitchell explained during one of their sessions. Your pottery business represented a threat to his narrative that you were incapable of making good decisions. The poisoning was his attempt to prove that your independence was dangerous and unsustainable. Understanding these patterns helped Rebecca recognize healthy relationships and establish boundaries that protected her from future manipulation. She learned to trust her own perceptions and to seek support when she felt confused or uncertain about people's motivations. 3 years after her father's conviction, Rebecca Martinez stood in her pottery studio, her hands covered in clay as she shaped a piece that would become part of a series about transformation and growth. The young woman who had once doubted her own reality now ran a thriving business, maintained healthy relationships, and had become an advocate for other survivors of family abuse. The studio apartment above her workspace had been transformed into a bright, welcoming space filled with plants and artwork from local artists. The contrast with the sterile hospital room where she had nearly died was stark and intentional. This was a space where healing and creativity flourished. Rebecca's story had become a catalyst for change that extended far beyond her personal recovery. Medical schools now included training on family abuse in their curricula. Hospitals had developed better protocols for protecting vulnerable patients. Legal precedents established by her case made it easier to prosecute similar crimes. But perhaps most importantly, her experience had shown that even the most sophisticated manipulation and abuse could be overcome with proper support, medical care, and an individual's determination to reclaim their life and identity. The woman who had once been slowly poisoned by the person she trusted most had not only survived, she had transformed her trauma into a force for protecting others and creating beauty in the world.
5 years after that terrifying night when paramedics rushed Rebecca Martinez into Riverside General Hospital, she stood at a podium in the auditorium of Johns Hopkins Medical School, addressing an audience of future doctors who would soon face their own complex cases of suspected abuse. When I collapsed in my family's backyard, I weighed 87 pounds and was dying from systematic poisoning, Rebecca began, her voice carrying clearly to the back of the packed auditorium. But the most dangerous part wasn't the colchicine in my system, it was that everyone believed my poisoner was my protector. The medical students listened with rapt attention as Rebecca shared details that had become part of medical school curricula across the country. Her case study was now taught in courses on family violence, toxicology, and medical ethics, helping train a new generation of physicians to recognize manipulation disguised as care. Dr. Jennifer Park, now the Director of Patient Safety at Ohio State University Medical Center, introduced Rebecca at these speaking engagements. The doctor who had saved Rebecca's life had become a close friend and collaborator in reforming medical protocols nationwide. Rebecca's case taught us that our assumptions about family dynamics can literally be life-threatening, Dr. Park explained to the medical students. We've learned to trust our clinical observations over family narratives, especially when those narratives consistently undermine a patient's credibility. The changes implemented after Rebecca's case had already prevented similar tragedies. In Chicago, doctors at Northwestern Memorial Hospital identified a case where a husband was poisoning his wife with insulin, catching the abuse after just 3 weeks thanks to new protocols requiring independent patient interviews. In Denver, a teenager was protected from a mother who had been inducing seizures with medication, discovered when medical staff noticed the pattern of family behavior that Rebecca's case had highlighted. But Rebecca's influence extended beyond medical training. She had become a powerful advocate for legislative reform, working with state lawmakers to strengthen protections for adult victims of family abuse. The Martinez Act, passed by the Ohio legislature in 2027, required mandatory reporting of suspected adult family abuse and provided funding for specialized training programs. Rebecca has turned her trauma into a force for protecting others, explained State Senator Maria Rodriguez, who had sponsored the legislation. Her advocacy work has directly led to policy changes that will save lives for generations to come. The ripple effects of Rebecca's case reached unexpected places. Robert Martinez's conviction had prompted investigations into other suspicious medical cases involving family members, leading to the discovery of 3 additional poisoning schemes across Ohio. 2 other fathers and 1 mother were prosecuted for similar crimes, with Rebecca's case providing the legal framework for successful convictions. Dr. Amanda Phillips, the psychiatrist who had nearly been manipulated into having Rebecca committed, became another unlikely ally in reform efforts. She developed new assessment protocols to help mental health professionals identify when family reports about a patient might be fabricated or exaggerated. Robert Martinez nearly convinced me to institutionalize his daughter based on complete lies, Dr. Phillips admitted during a conference on psychiatric ethics. His deception was so sophisticated that it fooled someone with 20 years of experience. We had to completely rethink how we evaluate family-reported mental health concerns. Rebecca's family relationships had evolved in unexpected ways over the years. Amanda, now a practicing physician, had become one of Rebecca's strongest supporters, using her medical knowledge to help other families recognize signs of abuse. The guilt Amanda felt about initially doubting Rebecca had motivated her to specialize in emergency medicine, where she could be on the front lines of identifying victims. David had taken a different path, leaving his corporate job to become a financial crimes investigator with the Ohio Attorney General's office. His engineering background and intimate knowledge of how his father had manipulated financial systems made him uniquely qualified to help other victims recover stolen assets. "I can't undo the months I spent believing Dad's lies about Rebecca," David explained during a family interview for a documentary about their case, "but I can use what I learned about his methods to help other families who've been victimized by financial abuse." Patricia Martinez had moved to Florida after her divorce was finalized, seeking distance from the memories and community judgment in Ohio. Her relationship with Rebecca remained strained, but had evolved from complete estrangement to cautious communication. Patricia attended therapy to process her role in enabling Robert's abuse, slowly acknowledging how she had chosen to believe convenient lies rather than face difficult truths about her husband. The financial recovery had taken years, but Rebecca's pottery business now thrived beyond anything she had imagined before her illness. The publicity from her case had brought national attention to her work, leading to exhibitions in galleries from New York to San Francisco. Her pieces commanded prices that allowed her to support herself comfortably while also funding a nonprofit organization she had established to help other abuse survivors. The Emergence Foundation, named after her breakthrough art exhibition, provided financial assistance for medical bills, legal fees, and therapy costs for victims of family abuse. The foundation also funded research into new methods for detecting intentional poisoning and supported training programs for medical professionals. "Rebecca has created something beautiful from something horrible," said Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who continued to serve on the foundation's advisory board. "She's transformed her experience of being systematically destroyed into a system for helping others rebuild their lives." One of the foundation's most innovative programs paired abuse survivors with medical students, allowing future doctors to learn directly from people who had experienced manipulation by family members. These partnerships helped medical students develop the instincts needed to recognize when family dynamics might be harmful rather than helpful. Rebecca's personal life had also flourished in ways that seemed impossible during her darkest days. She had married Marcus Chen, a social worker she met during her advocacy work, in a small ceremony at her pottery studio surrounded by the artwork that chronicled her journey from victim to survivor. Marcus understood trauma and healing in ways that made him an ideal partner for someone who had experienced such profound betrayal. Their relationship represented everything Robert Martinez had tried to prevent: Rebecca's independence, her success, her ability to trust and be trusted by someone who valued her strength rather than trying to exploit her vulnerabilities. The couple had recently purchased a larger studio space where Rebecca could expand her pottery business and Marcus could run therapy groups for abuse survivors. The building also housed offices for the Emergence Foundation, creating a comprehensive resource center for people rebuilding their lives after family trauma. Robert Martinez remained in prison, serving his sentence at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution. He had filed multiple appeals, all of which had been denied, and continued to maintain his innocence despite overwhelming evidence of his crimes. Prison records showed he had received no visitors since his second year of incarceration, as even his most loyal supporters had eventually accepted the reality of his guilt. Psychological evaluations conducted during his imprisonment revealed a narcissistic personality disorder so severe that he remained unable to acknowledge wrongdoing or show genuine remorse for his actions. Dr. Thomas Hartley, the prison psychiatrist who evaluated Robert, described him as one of the most manipulative individuals he had encountered in 30 years of forensic psychology. Robert Martinez still believes he was justified in his actions, Dr. Hartley explained in a report submitted to the parole board. He views his daughter's recovery and success as evidence that she was never really sick, rather than understanding that her improvement resulted from removing his influence from her life. He poses a significant risk to any family member who might be vulnerable to his manipulation. The parole board unanimously denied Robert's first eligible hearing, citing his lack of remorse and the ongoing threat he represented. Rebecca had submitted a victim impact statement for the hearing, explaining how her father's release would force her to live in constant fear despite the security measures she had implemented. "My father spent months slowly killing me while convincing everyone, including me, that he was saving my life," Rebecca wrote in her statement. His ability to deceive medical professionals, family members, and even his victim demonstrates a level of manipulation that makes him permanently dangerous. "I have built a meaningful life helping other survivors, but his release would force me to live as a victim again." As Rebecca concluded her presentation to the Johns Hopkins medical students, she shared the lesson that had become central to her advocacy work. Trust your clinical judgment, document everything you observe, and remember that the most dangerous abusers are often the ones who appear most concerned about their victims' welfare. The auditorium erupted in applause as future doctors absorbed the gravity of what they had learned. Many would carry Rebecca's story with them throughout their careers, using her experience to protect patients who might otherwise suffer in silence. Walking across the Johns Hopkins campus after her presentation, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her from a hospital bed where she was slowly dying to a position where she could save others from similar fates. The young woman who had once doubted her own reality now helped shape the reality of medical education and patient protection across the country. Her father had tried to erase her identity and independence, but instead he had unknowingly created one of the most powerful advocates for abuse survivors in America. Rebecca Martinez had not only survived systematic poisoning, she had transformed her experience into a legacy of protection and healing that would outlive both her trauma and her traumatizer. The girl who was once told she was faking illness for money had become the woman who ensured no one else would suffer alone in silence. Dr. Park's phone buzzed during Rebecca's presentation, displaying a message that would add another chapter to their ongoing mission. A hospital in Seattle was requesting consultation on a case involving a teenage boy whose stepfather insisted the child was fabricating seizures for attention. The medical team suspected intentional harm but needed guidance on how to proceed without alerting the potential abuser. "Cases like this come across my desk every few weeks now," Dr. Park explained to Rebecca over dinner that evening. "Your story has given medical professionals the confidence to trust their instincts when family dynamics don't match clinical observations." The Seattle case would become another success story in what had become an informal network of medical professionals trained in recognizing sophisticated family abuse. Within 72 hours, doctors discovered the stepfather had been slipping seizure-inducing medication into the boy's food, using a method remarkably similar to Robert Martinez's approach with colchicine. Rebecca's influence had created a domino effect throughout the medical community. Doctors who attended her presentations returned to their hospitals and implemented new patient interview techniques. Nurses learned to document concerning family behaviors that might indicate manipulation rather than genuine concern. Hospital administrators developed policies requiring second opinions when families repeatedly questioned patient credibility. The International Association of Emergency Physicians invited Rebecca to speak at their annual conference in Geneva, recognizing that family-perpetrated medical abuse transcended cultural and national boundaries. Her presentation to physicians from 43 countries revealed similar cases emerging worldwide as medical professionals learned to recognize the warning signs. "We've identified cases in every developed nation represented here," explained Dr. Hans Müller, the conference organizer from University Hospital Zurich. Rebecca's advocacy has sparked a global awakening about this hidden form of abuse. During the Geneva conference, Rebecca met Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo, who described a case involving a businessman who had been poisoning his elderly mother to gain control of her estate. The manipulation tactics were nearly identical to Robert Martinez's approach, suggesting that abusers worldwide employed similar psychological strategies to exploit medical systems. "The patterns are universal," Dr. Tanaka observed. "These perpetrators understand how to exploit cultural expectations about family devotion and medical professionals' desire to collaborate with concerned relatives." Rebecca's foundation had begun funding international research into family-perpetrated medical abuse, supporting studies that would establish global protocols for detection and prevention. The research revealed that such cases were far more common than previously recognized, with most going undetected because medical systems lacked frameworks for identifying them. Back in Ohio, Rebecca's pottery studio had evolved into something resembling a pilgrimage site for abuse survivors. People traveled from across the country to visit the place where she had rebuilt her life, seeking inspiration for their own recovery journeys. Rebecca welcomed these visitors, often spending hours sharing her experience and offering encouragement to people facing their own battles with family manipulation. One particularly moving visitor was Elena Rodriguez, a nurse from Phoenix whose own mother had been systematically poisoning her for 3 years. Elena had recognized the signs after attending one of Rebecca's medical conference presentations, leading to her mother's arrest and conviction for attempted murder. "Your story saved my life," Elena told Rebecca during her visit to the studio. "I was starting to believe I was actually losing my mind when I heard you speak about how your father made you doubt your own reality. I realized my mother was doing the same thing to me." Elena's case had become another landmark prosecution, with Rebecca providing expert testimony about the psychological manipulation tactics used by family abusers. The trial resulted in a conviction and a 12-year sentence, while Elena recovered completely once the poisoning stopped. These connections with other survivors had become one of the most meaningful aspects of her advocacy work. She maintained correspondence with dozens of people whose cases had been resolved after medical professionals applied lessons learned from her experience. Each success story reinforced her belief that surviving her father's abuse had served a larger purpose. Marcus Chen had documented many of these survivor stories through his work at the Foundation, creating a comprehensive database that researchers use to identify common patterns in family-perpetrated medical abuse. His background in social work provided crucial insights into the family dynamics that enabled such crimes to continue undetected. What we're seeing is that these abusers often target family members who have already been isolated or marginalized within the family system. They exploit existing tensions and doubts to make their victims appear unreliable or attention-seeking. The Foundation's research had identified several risk factors that made individuals vulnerable to family-perpetrated medical abuse: financial dependence on the abuser, previous conflicts about life choices or independence, families with rigid expectations about success and conformity, and medical conditions that were difficult to diagnose definitively. Rebecca's case checked every one of these boxes, making her the perfect victim for her father's scheme. But the same factors that made her vulnerable had also made her survival and recovery a powerful symbol of resilience that resonated with other survivors. The Foundation's newest initiative involved training family court judges to recognize signs of medical abuse in custody and guardianship cases. Several high-profile cases had emerged where abusive family members sought legal control over their victims under the guise of medical necessity, using tactics similar to Robert Martinez's planned psychiatric commitment scheme. Judge Patricia Williams from the Franklin County Family Court, who had overseen several cases involving the Foundation's expertise, described the training as revolutionary for the legal system. Before this training, we might have viewed a family member's detailed documentation of a patient's inconsistent symptoms as evidence of caring concern, Judge Williams explained. Now, we understand that such documentation might actually be evidence of systematic abuse designed to undermine the victim's credibility. The legal precedents established by Robert Martinez's conviction had made it easier to prosecute similar cases, but also easier to identify them before they reached the criminal stage. Family courts could now intervene to protect vulnerable adults from abusive relatives who sought control through manufactured medical crises. Rebecca's influence had even reached the insurance industry, which had begun developing protocols to identify suspicious patterns of medical claims that might indicate family-perpetrated abuse. Insurance investigators trained in recognizing these patterns had prevented several schemes similar to Robert's life insurance fraud. We're seeing attempts to escalate medical conditions artificially to justify large insurance payouts, explained investigator James Morrison from Nationwide Insurance. Rebecca's case taught us to look for correlation between family member involvement and claim escalation patterns. The education sector had also embraced Rebecca's story as a powerful teaching tool. Medical schools, nursing programs, and social work departments across the country required students to study her case as part of their training in recognizing abuse. The case study format allowed students to work through the complex decision-making process that medical professionals had faced when confronted with Robert's manipulation. Professor Linda Chen at Case Western Reserve University Medical School had developed an interactive simulation based on Rebecca's case, allowing students to experience the pressure and confusion that medical professionals felt when family members consistently undermined a patient's credibility. Students initially make the same mistakes that Rebecca's original doctors made, Professor Chen observed. They want to trust the concerned father and question the patient's reliability. The simulation teaches them to resist that instinct and focus on clinical evidence rather than family narratives. These educational initiatives ensured that future generations of medical professionals would be better equipped to protect vulnerable patients from family abuse. The ripple effects of Rebecca's case would continue protecting people for decades to come, long after her own advocacy work might end. Rebecca's personal growth had continued alongside her public advocacy. She had completed a master's degree in public health, focusing her thesis research on developing screening tools for family-perpetrated medical abuse. Her academic work provided scientific rigor to support the intuitive recognition that medical professionals were developing through her training programs. The thesis research had revealed startling statistics about the prevalence of family-perpetrated medical abuse. Conservative estimates suggested that such cases occurred at least 1% of all hospital admissions involving family advocacy, meaning thousands of victims were being abused annually in the United States alone. We're not talking about a rare phenomenon, Rebecca explained during her thesis defense. We're talking about a systematic problem that has been invisible because we didn't know how to look for it. Her research had attracted attention from the Centers for Disease Control, which was considering adding family-perpetrated medical abuse to their surveillance systems for tracking public health threats. Such official recognition would provide funding for prevention programs and establish national protocols for identification and intervention. Rebecca's transformation from victim to researcher to advocate represented a complete reclamation of the identity her father had tried to destroy. The young woman he had dismissed as an impractical artist had become a scholar whose work would protect vulnerable people nationwide. The pottery studio remained central to Rebecca's life, providing both financial independence and emotional grounding. Her latest series, titled Witnesses, featured pieces inspired by the medical professionals who had saved her life and the abuse survivors who continue to inspire her advocacy work. Each piece in the series told a story of recognition and protection, with glazes that shift from dark, threatening colors to bright, hopeful ones. The series had been acquired by the Smithsonian Institution for their collection on American social justice movements, ensuring that Rebecca's artistic legacy would be preserved alongside her advocacy work. The studio had also become a training ground for other abuse survivors interested in advocacy work. Rebecca mentored people who wanted to share their stories publicly, helping them develop the emotional resilience needed to confront painful memories in service of protecting others. One of her mentees, Thomas Park, had survived 15 years of financial and medical abuse by his adult children before escaping with the help of protocols developed after Rebecca's case. Thomas now spoke to elder care professionals about recognizing abuse disguised as family concern, using his experience to protect other elderly people from similar exploitation. Rebecca taught me that survival isn't enough, Thomas explained during one of his presentations. We have an obligation to use our experiences to prevent others from suffering the same harm. These mentor relationships had created an informal network of survivor advocates whose collective voice carried more weight than any individual story. Their coordinated advocacy had influenced legislation in 15 states and prompted policy changes at hundreds of hospitals nationwide. As Rebecca stood in her studio on a quiet Tuesday evening, working on a piece for her next exhibition, she reflected on the unimaginable journey that had brought her to this moment. The father who had tried to erase her existence had unknowingly created one of the most powerful forces for protecting vulnerable people in modern America. Her hands moved confidently across the clay, shaping something beautiful from raw material, a metaphor that had become the defining principle of her life since recovering from her father's abuse. Everything he had tried to destroy had been rebuilt stronger and more beautiful than before. The young woman who had once been systematically poisoned by the person she trusted most had become a beacon of hope for thousands of people facing their own battles with family manipulation and abuse. Her legacy would live on in every life saved by medical professionals who learned to trust their instincts, every survivor who found the courage to speak their truth, and every policy that protected vulnerable people from those who would exploit family bonds for personal gain. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.